Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been with RICS for over 11 years now. I work within the standards, regulation and thought leadership part of the organisation, and my job is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 qualified members working right across the property life cycle, across land, planning and development, construction, valuation, finance, building operations, it's clearly a very, very wide canvas upon which data and technology is having a profound and very positive effect. And indeed, our members work across a whole host of asset types as well, land itself, as I mentioned, but residential, commercial, alternative assets, and indeed infrastructure. So once again, a hugely important area when we look at the impact of data and technology. And today I'm really glad to have Tom join me from spaceOS. So Tom, please do join me.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Well, I always like to, before we get into the kind of bits and bytes and the kind of areas that your firm are looking at, it's always nice to have a bit of a kind of a human element. So it'd be great to hear a bit about your backstory and indeed the origin story of spaceOS itself.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been with spaceOS for 2.5 years now, and prior to that, I was working for WeWork, very much in the co-working and flex working side of things. So at WeWork, I was helping big enterprise organizations really try and utilize flex working as a means to sort of achieve their objectives, become more productive, help their employees feel more engaged with the work environment. And then very much wanted to continue that trend when I left WeWork and then move into the prop tech sector. So yeah, my experience is very much on the flex and co-working side, and spaceOS also started very much on that side of the industry. So our CEO, Marley, was working in a co-working space in New York called New Lab in Brooklyn, and basically realized it was very difficult for himself to book meeting rooms, to access the events they had going on, and effectively had a background in technology already and wanted to come up with a solution that would make all of those things very easy for him to do and for the other users in that building to do. So spaceOS was formed in 2017, and since then we started working with a lot of flex and co-working clients. We then moved into working with much more traditional office owners and landlords, these big high-rise buildings in downtown central locations. And more recently, we've started working with the corporate clients, the occupiers of those buildings directly themselves. So yeah, it's been a nice kind of journey from flex and co-working into much more conventional, much more traditional means of office real estate.
Thanks, Tom. Now, as ever terms emerge into the kind of real estate and prop tech world and become almost accepted without perhaps people really understanding exactly what they mean sometimes, and I'd be keen to get your definition of this phrase now that we use so often, tenant experience, and indeed why it matters so much more now, perhaps.
Sure. I think for the context of this, given that we focus on the commercial side of things, particularly around the office environment, when I talk about tenant experience, I mean it very, very much in that sense. So from our perspective, tenant experience really is the way that people feel in the built environment and how the built environment can be leveraged to influence those feelings. So for instance, am I bored in this office? Am I feeling productive? Am I motivated? Am I engaged? Do I have a sense of community and belonging here that perhaps I don't have working at home or from the local coffee shop? Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make, because in a world now where a lot of people can choose how, where, and when they work on an almost daily basis, I think landlords and flex operators and corporate real estate teams have a real challenge on their hand in terms of how do we get people back into our spaces. So yeah, tenant experience from our perspective is very much the way that people feel and how you can use the built environment to influence how people feel on a day-to-day basis.
And I guess that's interesting that it's moved beyond the sort of sense of, just a kind of cost and sort of temperature and kind of those things, very much focused on the human piece. And I guess that leads us on naturally to think about one of the effects of the pandemic, that acceleration of hybrid working and how perhaps tenant experience is even more important now in that hybrid world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we think about hybrid, the hybrid work environment right now, I think, is a fairly ambiguous phrase. I think lots of people attribute different meanings to it. I think in the context of this conversation, I like to think of it in four senses. There are four pillars really that create this hybrid framework as we know it. So the first is data, the second is sustainability, the third is people, and then the fourth is trust. And I think you need every single one of those to have a really successful hybrid work environment for a corporate client or in a multi-tenanted space. So if we think about data, well, obviously that relates to the quantitative stuff, the numbers that help us track different metrics, productivity, engagement, profitability, to really help us understand how things are working in the hybrid world. The second aspect then is sustainability. I think that's a fairly obvious one, but actually with every company out there in real estate right now, or even big enterprises, with number one priority being how do we achieve these ambitious net zero targets, I think there is a real focus on how that can be achieved, given that real estate has such a big contributing factor to that, both through the embodied carbon and also through the operational carbon and obviously ongoing energy usage. So sustainability is a huge part of the hybrid world and how that feeds into the broader real estate context. The third then is around people, so the human-centric side of real estate, the how, why, and when work gets done, the tools that people are given to really enable distributed workforces to operate in a very effective way, whether they choose to come into the office or whether they choose to work from home or from a third space on any given day. And then the final pillar is trust. And I think trust permeates through the entire framework, but I think we can break it down into two components. Firstly, how can trust best be fostered across fully distributed workforces and teams? How do managers build systems in place or put systems in place that enable them to really trust their teams to go and get the work done? But then also, how do we have reliable data sources? Do we trust our teams to go and get the work done in the best possible way to meet the needs of the business moving forward? Do we trust that our sustainability initiatives are focusing on the right areas? So yeah, I think when we think of the hybrid world of work in those four contexts, it's fairly obvious that tenant experience sits in that third pillar. So the people side of things, the human-centric stuff, which really is all of the soft and hard stuff that makes people feel a certain way in the built environment, from the aesthetics to the physical space configuration to all of the different spaces and services and amenities that are on offer throughout those buildings. So yeah, that's kind of hybrid work from my perspective.
So I mean, there's a lot to cover there. So from that perspective, given those four pillars you've described, what do you see as the key challenges that landlords, enterprise operators, flex operators face in this new hybrid area when they're thinking about how do they deliver that tenant experience?
Good question. I think I've heard it from multiple people across the industry, and I fully agree with the idea that we are now moving very much into this era, which we could refer to as the hotelification of office spaces. There is a real integration and blurring of the space between the physical space configuration and also the services and amenities that are on offer in those buildings. And I think the first big challenge there is that there are not enough real estate professionals out there who have a background in hospitality driven environments, right? I think we're actually seeing a big influx now of people who work in the hotel sector moving more into the office sector and into the workplace experience sector, because there is this realization that actually there is a fundamental skills gap in what we need now moving forward for this kind of tenant service driven work environment. So I think that's the kind of first one. I guess that leads quite nicely into the second challenge then, is that once we as space operators, once we have as landlords or corporate real estate teams have figured out what the right blend of services and amenities is to add value for our tenants or our workforce in this building, the question then becomes, how do we deliver these in a way that makes sense for the infrastructure, for the processes, for the personnel availability that we have in this building? And that can be a real minefield, right? I mean, if we think about digitization in real estate, it's happening across almost every aspect of the real estate sphere as we know it, on the facility side, on the construction side, now on the experiential side. So it really is a minefield for these real estate professionals, not necessarily having the tech background to understand what the best decision is. I think it can be a really, really daunting prospect there. And I think the third challenge is around data. So I think it's a fair comment to say there is a huge amount of raw data out there in the industry right now. The problem is it's just sat across multiple fragmented different systems. There are lots of different stakeholders who want access to different KPIs, different metrics. So there's a real lack of consolidation in the data side of things. So then the question becomes, A, how do we know which services and amenities to bring into the building? B, how do we implement them in a way that makes sense for the amenities that we have and for the kind of future proofingness of this real estate and this space moving forward? And then how do we leverage data to inform us if those services and amenities are working, and how can we configure them moving forward in a way that's going to add as much value as possible? So yeah, how do we get as much of that data behind a single pane of glass and give access to as many different stakeholders as possible, from an experiential side of view, which, as I've said, there isn't really a whole lot of experience in from an office perspective as it stands.
And one thing I suppose you could almost frame as a challenge is the fact that obviously the majority of the building stock is already here. So, tenant experience has to be for existing buildings, not just new developments. How do you see that kind of challenge?
I think there is a bit of a misconception with this. I do think that, yeah, when we think of tenant experience, lots of people are thinking about these brand spanking new buildings, these amazing new developments that are going up in central business districts. Actually, a lot of the deployments we've been involved in with spaceOS, they've been focused very much on existing fully operational assets, or even retrofit projects. I think there are definitely advantages of deploying in newer buildings, right? You have more modern infrastructure, systems that are perhaps better set up and easier to integrate, and also to extract deeper data from. But we've actually seen a lot of success in deploying in older assets too.
Mm.
And actually some of the deployments in those buildings can actually be much more straightforward when you're not having to focus on all those big integrations with things like HVAC and BMS systems and smart sensors. We can actually do a more straightforward deployment. We can start seeing the benefits much more quickly, and you've got a fully operational building with which to use as either a proof of concept or a really nice, short-term trial period. So yeah, I would say there really isn't a preference from our perspective on whether these have to be deployed in new buildings or in older assets. I would actually add to this and say that obviously there's a huge focus right now in the market with interesting projects like Smart Score and Wide Score, people going for smart building accreditations, actually deploying tenant experience technology in older assets or retrofit projects can help clients achieve those higher accreditations if that's on the agenda. So it doesn't just have to be for these new swanky buildings. There can be a lot of nice use cases in existing stock.
No, I think it's a key point. And I guess I suppose to come to the heart of the conversation, given we're here to talk about data and technology, how does tenant experience technology help with these challenges? What does technology deliver in this space?
I think half half of what tenant experience technology is good for right now is really inspiring the art of the possible. I think, we've got companies like Google and Facebook that for a long period of time, they've been offering much more experiential aspects to their employees on a day-to-day basis. You see these amazing headquarters buildings in California and San Francisco. And I think it would be unfair to say that there's probably a lot of other corporate clients out there, real estate teams, workplace experience teams that have been thinking about how to do the same things for a long period of time. They just haven't necessarily had the means to do it. Well, now tenant experience platforms have really made a lot of that much easier. All of a sudden, we can deliver all of these services, all of these amenities in a format that people are very familiar with using, which is on their mobile phone, right? I mean, we have an app for almost everything these days, from ordering food to booking flights, to finding directions for that restaurant or that bar that we're going to meet our friends in later. So it makes sense then that we would have one for our office building that would enable us to access all of the different services there very, very easy through my mobile screen. So I think firstly, and this kind of comes down to the choosing the right technology partner, is how can we be guided on this journey and really provide the services and make them accessible in a way that's really going to add maximum value for our workforce or our tenants or our members in this building. So that's the first one. I think there's a huge amount of value in the data that you can get from tenant experience platforms too. If we think about data in commercial real estate and what it's historically been focused on, it really has leaned heavily towards building operations, optimization of spaces. How do we become more operationally efficient, reduce our energy bills, improve air quality, improve bottom line profitability, all this kind of stuff. Well, actually now tenant experience technology is making it really, really easy to access or gather insight on, I would argue, one of the most fundamental parts of real estate which has been missing, which is how do people actually feel when they're using our office spaces? This human-centric piece now that's becoming ever more important. So all of a sudden now we have a means of being able to do that really effectively. So now when we're thinking about future real estate decisions, we're not just basing those decisions on data that focuses on the building. We're actually focusing on human-centric data now, which can help us become a more people-focused business, which I think has been a hugely important part that's been missing for a very long time in commercial real estate. And then finally,
sorry, carry on, Tom. Yeah.
No, and then I was just going to say, I think there is one final point that tenant experience is really addressing now, which is all about brand identity and marketing for these particular assets and these locations. Again, it's a piece that I think is hugely overlooked. So as an example for this, we have a big client of ours in Germany who have a big innovation campus there. They have an amazing brand identity, an amazing logo, lots of very cool colors going on in their color scheme. And now to back it up, they've got an app in the Google Play Store and in the Apple iOS store. So they've created this really amazing piece of brand recognition. And we've seen this deployed quite effectively with lots of big flex clients too, right? So if I'm a member of a flex working organization and I am based in London and I need to be in Bristol or Birmingham or Manchester next week, I can very easily book a space there. I can go along, and I know that when I turn up, I'm going to have a very, very similar experience. I'm going to have access to to almost identical facilities and spaces that I have access to in my home location. So all of a sudden, we've created this brand identity, we've created an expectation, and we're delivering a unified user experience across multiple locations for different members there, which I think is really, really undervalued as an advantage of tenant experience and how it can help create distinction in an ocean of kind of sameness, if you will. Maybe that's being unfair.
Well, the differentiation, as you say, I think in that
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
I think a natural sort of follow-on from that, and you talked about, dare I say it, the kind of traditional approach of looking at operational cost and that kind of thing, which obviously has to continue. But in what other ways are people actually measuring the success of these kind of tenant experience approaches? Because obviously they're going to take the savings, they're going to look at the operational performance, but how are they measuring the success when these are perhaps more, as you say, human-centric types of metrics? What are they measuring to say, yes, I'm getting an ROI on this investment?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question really depends on the owner or operator of the asset, right? I mean, as with everything in life, I'd say that the real ROIs, the benefits fall into two distinct categories, and that's either operational or it's financial. On the revenue side of things, you could have revenue stickiness by way of improved tenant attraction and retention. That's what lots of our clients are currently measuring directly now. It's the revenue generation or the addition to bottom line when we add new payable services or bookable spaces or events that people can buy tickets for, that sort of stuff. And then obviously you have the classic cost savings through improved operational efficiencies and the fact now that we can make more data-driven decisions, whether they're human-centric or whether they're operational. So those are kind of pretty classic in the financial bucket there. If we move into the operational bucket, some of the KPIs our clients are tracking there is energy or time savings through more intelligent or smarter maintenance or cleaning scheduling, faster response times to facilities management tickets, increased utilization of building spaces and amenities. If we have more communal spaces, how do we make them more accessible, more bookable? How can we generate more revenue from them? And also people are really tracking how all of these things are being accessed through the platforms and through the building apps themselves. So yeah, I'd say measuring success is fairly conventional in that sense in the buckets that you put it into. I do think there is a really interesting third area where, and again, this is I think overlooked in real estate generally, in that tenant experience technology should and could be seen as an opportunity to increase asset value in the event of a disposal. So we've actually heard this from a couple of our clients in Europe who engaged with us deliberately because they were looking for a means to try and add a premium on the sales price ahead of a portfolio disposal. And if you think about it, that can be a hugely compelling argument for acquiring an investor. If I can take a portfolio of buildings that are mostly let or fully let, I can show you tangible hard evidence or dashboards that say, look, 97% of our tenants are happy in this building and here are the reasons why. We also have other data in terms of the building operations and optimization. Me as a potential investor or acquirer, I'm going to be pretty content looking at that sort of data. So yeah, we can look at these more conventional kind of operational and financial metrics, but at the end of the day, if we're delivering a premium on our sales value, that's a huge measure of success, right? It's a slightly longer term one, but that is a huge measure of success that I think people they're not really thinking that far ahead.
But yeah, but as you say, it is a kind of a proxy for kind of covenant strength, to use the jargon, isn't it, in terms of the stickiness of occupiers and their happiness to pay a certain level of rent. It certainly has an effect. You touched on it earlier, Tom, when you talked about kind of almost retrofitting or working on sort of existing buildings, but and I guess there's always averages and edge cases, but how long does it take to deploy some of these solutions, and then obviously from an investment perspective, how long before people can see some benefits in terms of immediacy?
Again, it really comes down to a case-by-case basis. We see typically a relatively straightforward deployment can take around 6 weeks, maybe up to 8 weeks. It gets a little bit more complicated when we need to do more, I'd say, deeper integrations with other building systems, things like
Yeah.
access control, elevators. You can imagine some of our flex clients want things like CRM and accounting and finance
Yeah.
software integrated. So in those cases, we can see, anywhere from 3 to 6 months to get the system fully operational. It really depends on the use case. The retrofits where there's less integrations tend to be a bit quicker than the new developments where we have to bring in lots of these these deeper integrations. In respect of the benefits and how quick clients can expect to see results there, again, it kind of depends on what metrics our clients are using to determine success. But we have means that I'd say are short, medium, and then long term in terms of their time to see the benefits. So you might use things like user adoption figures or active monthly usage to take short term measures on how successful the platform's been. User adoption, that's something that you would see whether it's been successful straight out of the gate, right? We deploy a solution today, within the first week we see X number of users have signed up. It's fairly typical to see a high sign-up rate, and then obviously that taper off over time as the number of users sort of maxes out. So I would say that's a very, very short-term metric to determine instant success out of the gate. Active monthly users is also short-term, but I would say after the first 3 months, you can generally start to see trends in how people are using and engaging with the platforms and the building services that you're offering. So again, that's slightly longer term, but still a short-term metric you can use to determine if the platform is being used. You can, from day one, I mean, a lot of these tenant experience platforms are really good at enabling you to collect direct feedback from tenants and from your workforce, right? So they can things with a quick 1 to 5 star survey for, let's say, a meeting room booking or an event, or perhaps a facilities management ticket that's been resolved. So we can already start to see instant feedback from day one if we want to. When we think about these meatier financial and operational metrics, those typically take longer. We're talking probably 6 to 12 months before you really start to see the benefit of those. So I'd say my one piece of advice here is give it time. It does take time to embed these platforms as part of the kind of infrastructure and processes in place in those buildings. But one of the other interesting metrics we have as well to measure or to start seeing the success of these platforms is we have a couple of clients in Europe who they're using tenant experience technology as a selling tool for buildings that aren't open yet. So they're actually getting people into the showrooms. They're showing them the physical spaces. Obviously, this is what the building's going to look like. But actually, we also have this building app, which is going to enable your tenants, your employees to access these other services that we're going to offer. And they're actually seeing increased leasing times as well, because obviously they have a better sales arsenal. So really depends on which metric you want to cherry pick there, ranging from short-term, really short-term time frame to see the benefits to really long-term ones for those meatier kind of financial KPIs.
Indeed, and I guess it's a good reminder that any kind of implementation of data and tech needs a clear-headed set of objectives and metrics from the get-go, that people are going to understand why they're doing it, what are their expectations, what do they want to solve, or what do they want to improve. I mean, are there, apart from that kind of preparation by a client in terms of understanding why they're doing it, what they want to get from it, what they want to measure, what other mistakes would you recommend people avoiding when they look at bringing in a tenant experience solution like this?
I think there's 2 or 3 that I could name off the top of my head, really, that are fairly common. The first one I think is, and I don't think this is exclusive to tenant experience technology, I think this is exclusive to technology full stop. It's that a lot of stakeholders really do see it as a silver bullet that's going to solve a single problem or a group of problems, without really putting too much focus on the underlying processes and behaviors that go beneath it, right? So I've seen it a few times with either big landlords or corporate workplace teams, where they take on a shiny new building app. They think it's going to solve all of their problems. All of a sudden they're surprised when they try and apply it to old processes and behaviors, and it doesn't have the impact that they're expecting. So what I would say is that when you do think about tenant experience technology, it's so important to augment it with a really robust change management process that's really going to help you drive as much value, change people's behavior, and change the processes to meet the new technology that you've got within the building. That's the first one. The second one, I'm seeing a huge number of really large-scale RFPs being deployed at the moment for relatively small deployment opportunities. the problem with RFPs is that a lot of the times businesses aren't asking the right questions. They come to you with a huge shopping list of features that they need, and very specific information on how those features need to function for this particular building. I think the analogy I like to give here is that it's like me walking into an Audi garage and saying, I want a car that does 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds. It's got, you know, sports suspension and steering and all of the sort of sports line trimmings on the interior. And actually what I should be saying when I come into an Audi showroom is, I have a family of 4, we go on regular camping holidays, or we do lots of outdoor activities. What would you recommend? Like, how would you help me kind of select that car? But too many companies are coming at us with a very, very specific, very rigid list that they're not very willing to be flexible on, and then it kind of yeah, it's just not, they're not asking the right questions basically, and if they're not asking the right questions, you're not going to get the best answer. So I think there's probably a better way to run these RFPs and ask the right questions. I would say the third big mistake then is that once you do have a technology selected and you're deploying it, it's not feeding the beast. And what I mean by that is you're not being proactive with filling it with content, with running programs of events. I mean, the best deployments I've seen are when the clients really get on board with it. They really become proactive. They're running lots of events. They're really feeding it with regular news and content. They're really maximizing as many of the features as possible, because at the end of the day, the more features you include in these deployments, the more reasons you give people to use the app. Obviously, the more people are going to engage with it. But I've seen it a few times where, again, this maybe relates to the first problem or first mistake, where clients see this as a silver bullet to solve their problems. Actually, unless you're feeding it regularly with information and content, it sort of just falls by the wayside. People have less reasons to use it. So most good, most respectable tenant experience providers now, spaceOS included, we have whole customer experience teams or community teams that are dedicated to helping provide off-the-shelf content, helping share insights into what our other clients are doing to help build engagement and organic growth there. So I think, yeah, there isn't really any excuse now for getting low engagement figures when all of these companies are very willing to help and support. I think when you're deploying, you just have to take a bit of responsibility and make sure that you really are being proactive and engaging with it as much as you can to obviously get your tenants and your workforce on board too.
And as you say, Tom, it's a really kind of living and breathing, organism, isn't it? A tenant experience app in that sense. It has to be fed, it has to have content, new things in it to create that kind of sticky and high level of usage. I guess for my last question, I'd like to almost kind of go back to some fundamentals about the way the pandemic has accelerated hybrid working. And so many, corporate occupiers I've talked to rather, say that they're still dealing with this challenge of encouraging people back into work, but also recognizing that people don't go into work perhaps anymore just to sit at a desk and do the kind of work that they could very easily do from their home office. And it's more about this getting people in for the genuine collaboration, whatever shape or form that looks like in terms of teams, virtual teams, project driven. How are you seeing tenant experience technology helping that kind of collaboration piece to make sure that people can understand that space is there for collaboration and coordinate and orchestrate that to make sure the right people are in at the right time in the right kind of spaces?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of our clients have they physically reconfigured the office to offer more collaboration spaces. The way that we've sort of tried to augment that with technology, or the way that we've thought about it, is how do we bring social engagement? How do we bring the social piece, the collaboration piece, into the booking process? Because that's fundamentally where most people, I think, are trying to orchestrate this kind of in-person attendance. So, we've seen it with meeting rooms. Obviously, we're very familiar with Microsoft Outlook and with Google Calendar. It's possible to book a meeting room, and I can invite some colleagues or clients directly through that, through those booking tools. Well, actually, we want to take that one step further now. What we're seeing, and actually some really good use cases of this, has been with some of our corporate clients, where perhaps you've got different team neighborhood areas. Maybe you've got the HR team area, the sales team area. So if I'm in the HR team, what I can do now with some of these tenant experience platforms is I can go into the HR team desk area. I can physically see who else is going to be sat in that area on any given day of the week. So I know that when I go in next Wednesday, I can see that Dave and Sally are going to be in. I can get, we're working on that project together. I can make sure that I go in there too, and we can work on that piece when we're all in the office together. We're also seeing a lot of these platforms to actually take that one step further now. So I can actually set a list of my favorite people, my immediate colleagues, my immediate teammates, and I can actually get notified when these people book a space in the office in any given day. So, if 3 or 4 of my teammates are coming in next Tuesday, I can actually receive a push notification to my phone, which is the system, an automated aspect of the system, saying, hey, your immediate colleagues have booked into the office next Tuesday. We recommend you book a desk here next to them where they're all going to be sat too. So yeah, we're seeing much more of this kind of automation and social engagement piece being brought into the entire booking process. That's the first way. I would say the second way is a lot of these tenant experience platforms now have these events booking or events management modules. So not only can I schedule an in-person meeting or book desks for any of my colleagues who I need to be working with, we can actually organize much more social pieces too. So lots of our clients now are running things like yoga classes, happy hours after work every third Thursday of the month, even big summer barbecues or Christmas parties, and they can all be scheduled, managed. We can manage check-ins through these tenant experience platforms. So yeah, it's just a couple of ways that we can already help out of the box our clients get people together and make sure that there are people in spaces either working or socializing or just generally engaging with each other.
That's great. And I suppose, to finish as a final comment, it's really kind of a piece of optimism here that technology is effectively supporting the human desire to collaborate, to meet people, to socialize. So it's not so much data and technology imposing, but actually supporting what we as social animals like to do, really.
Exactly. And I think that's how technology needs to be seen. It needs to be seen as a really effective enabler, not the silver bullet, but the enabler that augments the physical reality of the built environment and also how people choose to interact.
Brilliant. Well, it's been fascinating to chat, Tom. I look forward to catching up again in the future on what is still has a long way to go, I think, in terms of adoption, doesn't it, and reaping the benefits. But for today, thanks ever so much for your time, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Andrew.